In the heart of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, 42-year-old Amish farmer Jacob Miller has been living with a peculiar burden for 5 long years. A mysterious, perfectly round lump sits in the middle of his most fertile cornfield, about 6 feet wide and 3 feet high, covered in wild grass that grows differently than anywhere else on his land. Jacob's fellow Amish men, including his older brother Samuel and longtime friend Eli Stoltzfus, have urged him to simply plow around it, believing it's just an old tree stump or rock formation that God intended to remain undisturbed. But as each harvest season passes, Jacob notices the lump seems to be changing, growing, and sometimes, on the quietest nights, he swears he can hear something from deep beneath it. When a devastating drought threatens to destroy their entire community's livelihood, Jacob finally makes the decision that will change not just his life, but touch the hearts of everyone in their small town in ways no one could ever imagine. The morning mist clung to the Pennsylvania countryside like a prayer whispered across the rolling hills. Jacob Miller stood at the edge of his cornfield, his weathered hands wrapped around a steaming cup of black coffee, watching as the first rays of September sunlight pierced through the fog. At 42, Jacob had the kind of face that told stories, deep lines etched around his blue eyes from years of squinting into harvest suns, and a graying beard that his wife Sarah often said made him look wiser than his years. But wisdom, Jacob had learned, could sometimes feel more like a curse than a blessing. "You're staring at it again," came a gentle voice from behind him. Jacob didn't turn around. He didn't need to. After 18 years of marriage, he could recognize Sarah's footsteps on their wooden porch from 100 yards away. She moved with the quiet grace of a woman who had learned to navigate the world without making unnecessary noise, a trait common among the Amish, but perfected by his wife in ways that still amazed him. "It's different today," Jacob murmured, his breath visible in the cool morning air. "Look at the grass growing on top of it." Sarah stepped beside him, her plain blue dress rustling softly against her black apron. She was 38, with kind brown eyes and prematurely silver hair that she kept hidden beneath her white prayer cap. When she followed Jacob's gaze to the center of their cornfield, her expression tightened almost imperceptibly. There, about 200 yards from where they stood, sat the object that had been the source of countless quiet discussions in their household for the past 5 years. The lump, as they had come to call it, rose from the earth like a perfectly rounded hill, roughly 6 feet in diameter and standing about 3 feet high. What made it truly unusual wasn't just its symmetrical shape, but the way everything grew around it. The corn that surrounded the lump grew tall and healthy, creating an almost perfect circle of green stalks that seemed to bend slightly inward, as if drawn to whatever lay beneath the mysterious mound. But the grass that covered the lump itself was unlike anything else on their property. It grew in wild, thick patches of the deepest green either of them had ever seen, so vibrant it almost seemed to glow in the morning light. "The grass is greener today than yesterday," Sarah admitted quietly, "and thicker." Jacob nodded slowly. "And softer looking, almost like," he paused, searching for the right words, "like it's being cared for from underneath." They stood in comfortable silence for several minutes, both lost in their own thoughts. In the distance they could hear the familiar sounds of their community coming to life, the gentle lowing of cattle, the rhythmic chopping of wood, the voices of children helping with morning chores. These were the sounds that had provided the soundtrack to their entire lives, passed down through generations of families who had chosen to live simply, to work the land with their hands, and to trust in God's plan above all else. But the lump didn't fit into God's plan, at least not in any way that Jacob could understand. "Brother Samuel will be here soon," Sarah said, glancing toward the dirt road that connected their farm to the rest of their Amish district. "And Eli too. You know what they're going to say." Jacob's jaw tightened slightly. He loved his older brother Samuel dearly, and Eli Stoltzfus had been his closest friends since they were boys running barefoot through these same fields. But their practical approach to the mystery in his cornfield had begun to wear on him over the years. "They'll say the same thing they always say," Jacob replied, "that it's probably an old tree stump, or maybe a large rock that got buried somehow, that I should just plow around it and stop letting it trouble my mind. Maybe they're right, Sarah suggested gently, though Jacob could hear the uncertainty in her voice. Sarah, Jacob turned to face his wife fully for the first time that morning. In 5 years, have you ever seen a tree stump that makes the grass grow like that? Have you ever seen a buried rock that seems to respond to the weather? Sarah knew exactly what he meant. During particularly rainy seasons, the lump seemed to swell slightly, becoming more pronounced. During dry spells, it appeared to settle lower into the earth, and every spring, without fail, it was the first place in their entire field where new growth appeared, weeks before the rest of their land showed signs of awakening from winter's grip. No, she admitted, I haven't. The sound of horses' hooves on packed dirt announced the arrival of Jacob's morning visitors. Samuel Miller, at 46, was 4 years older than Jacob, and carried himself with the quiet authority that came naturally to him as one of the district's most respected farmers. His dark beard was streaked with more grey than Jacob's, and his hands bore the permanent stains of a man who had worked with soil and wood for over 3 decades. Beside Samuel rode Eli Stoltzfus, a lean man of 40, with sharp green eyes and a quick smile that had charmed half the eligible women in their district before he'd married his wife Ruth 15 years earlier. Eli had a mind for problem-solving that made him invaluable during barn raisings and harvest time, but he also had a stubborn streak that could rival a mule when he'd made up his mind about something. "Morning, Jacob." "Sarah," Samuel called out as he dismissed from his buggy. His voice carried the warmth of family, but Jacob could detect the subtle note of concern that had crept into their interactions over the past year. "Good morning," Sarah replied, offering both men the kind of genuine smile that had made her one of the most beloved women in their community. "I'll go prepare some breakfast. You men will want to eat before you start working." As Sarah headed back toward the house, Eli approached Jacob with the kind of purposeful stride that suggested he had something specific on his mind. "We need to talk about the harvest," Eli said without preamble. "David Yoder was by my place yesterday evening. The drought has been harder on some farms than others, and we're looking at maybe 60% of a normal yield this year." Jacob nodded grimly. The summer had been one of the driest in recent memory, and despite their community's skill at water conservation and drought-resistant farming techniques, there was only so much they could do when the rains simply didn't come. "How bad is it looking for your family?" Jacob asked. "Bad enough that Ruth is already talking about which pieces of furniture we might need to sell come winter." Eli replied honestly, "And we're not the only ones. The Hochstetler family is considering sending their oldest boy to work in town, non-Amish work, just to bring in enough money to buy seed for next year's planting." Samuel shook his head sadly. The idea of an Amish young man taking work in the English world, the term their community used for non-Amish society, was always a source of deep concern. It wasn't forbidden exactly, but it represented a step away from the simple, self-sufficient life they all valued so highly. "What about your fields, Jacob?" Samuel asked. "How are you managing with the dry weather?" Jacob gestured toward his cornfield, where healthy green stalks swayed gently in the morning breeze. While they weren't as tall as they might have been in a normal year, they were clearly thriving compared to what the other men had described. "We'll probably see about 85% of normal," Jacob said. "Maybe even 90% if we get some rain in the next few weeks." Both Samuel and Eli stared at him in surprise. 85%, Eli repeated. "Jacob, how is that possible? We all have the same soil, the same weather conditions." Jacob was quiet for a long moment, his gaze drifting once again to the mysterious lump in the center of his field. He'd been thinking about this very question for weeks now, and the only answer he could come up with was one that his brother and friend would probably refuse to consider. "I think," Jacob said slowly, "it might have something to do with that." He pointed toward the lump, and immediately saw both men's expressions shift from curious to concerned. "Jacob," Samuel said in the patient tone he might use with a child, "we've talked about this many times. That thing, whatever it is It's just something that got buried in your field years ago, maybe decades ago. It's not doing anything to help your crops grow. Then explain the grass, Jacob challenged. Explain why the corn grows in a perfect circle around it. Explain why this part of my field always shows the first signs of spring, and why it seems to hold moisture better than anywhere else on my property. Eli and Samuel exchanged a look that Jacob recognized immediately. It was the same look they'd been sharing for the past year whenever he brought up the lump, a mixture of concern and frustration that suggested they thought their friend might be losing his grip on reality. Jacob, Eli said carefully, sometimes when we're looking for answers to our problems, we start seeing patterns that aren't really there. Maybe your soil is just naturally better in that area. Maybe there's an underground spring nearby that you don't know about. I've farmed this land for 15 years, Jacob replied, his voice rising slightly. I know every inch of this property. I know where the soil is rich and where it's poor. I know where water collects and where it drains away. And I'm telling you, something about that lump is different. Something is helping my crops grow better than they should be, growing in weather like this. Samuel placed a firm hand on his younger brother's shoulder. Even if that were true, and I'm not saying it is, what exactly are you suggesting we do about it? Are you thinking about digging it up? The question hung in the air like morning fog. Jacob had been thinking about exactly that for months now, but hearing it spoken aloud made it sound somehow more real and more frightening at the same time. I don't know, Jacob admitted. Maybe I need to know what's under there. Jacob, no. Samuel's voice carried the authority of an older brother and a respected member of their community. You can't just go digging up random things on your property. What if it's something that should stay buried? What if you damage your field? What if you hurt yourself? Or worse, what if it's something that could help our whole community? Jacob countered. What if there's a reason my crops are doing better this year? What if whatever is under there could help other families avoid having to send their children to work in the English world? Eli stepped forward, his expression serious. Jacob, listen to yourself. You're talking about some kind of miracle buried in your cornfield. That's not how the world works, isn't it? Jacob asked. Isn't that exactly how the world works, according to everything we've been taught since we were children? God provides for his people in mysterious ways. He works through the natural world to show his love and care. Why is it so hard to believe that he might have provided something for our community in a time of need? The three men stood in silence for several minutes, each lost in his own thoughts. In the distance they could hear Sarah moving around in the kitchen, preparing what would undoubtedly be a hearty breakfast of eggs, bacon, fresh bread, and jam. The normalcy of those sounds seemed to emphasize just how unusual their conversation had become. Finally, Samuel spoke. Jacob, I love you like a brother, because you are my brother. And because I love you, I'm going to ask you to promise me something. Promise me you won't anything rash. Promise me you won't go digging around that lump without talking to the rest of us first. And promise me you'll at least consider the possibility that you might be wrong about all of this. Jacob looked into his brother's concerned eyes and saw the genuine love and worry there. Samuel had always been the practical one, the voice of reason when Jacob's curiosity got the better of him. Growing up, Samuel had talked Jacob out of climbing the tallest trees, swimming in the deepest parts of the creek, and exploring the abandoned buildings that dotted their countryside. But sometimes Jacob had learned the most dangerous thing you could do was ignore the voice in your heart that told you to take a closer look at something that didn't quite make sense. I promise, Jacob said finally, that I won't do anything without talking to you first. It wasn't exactly what Samuel had asked for, but it seemed to satisfy both men for the moment. Good, Eli said, clapping Jacob on the back. Now, how about that breakfast your wife is preparing? I can smell bacon from here, and after the morning I've had dealing with my own failing crops, I could use some of Sarah's good cooking to improve my mood. As they walked toward the house, Jacob cast one more glance over his shoulder at the mysterious lump in his cornfield. The morning sun was higher now, and the strange grass that covered the mound seemed to shimmer in the light like emeralds scattered across the earth. Whatever was under there, Jacob thought to himself, it had been waiting patiently for 5 years. It could probably wait a little longer. But as he followed his brother and friend toward the warmth and normalcy of his kitchen, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out, for his community, for his neighbors who were struggling with failed crops, and maybe even for whatever secret lay buried beneath that perfect circle of impossibly green grass. 3 weeks passed, and the drought showed no signs of breaking. The sky remained a merciless blue dome, stretching endlessly above Lancaster County, offering nothing but the cruel promise of another scorching day. Jacob stood in his kitchen before dawn, watching through the window as his neighbors' fields turned from green to yellow, to brown. With heartbreaking speed, Sarah moved quietly beside him, preparing their simple breakfast of oatmeal and fresh milk. Her movements had grown more deliberate lately, more careful, as if she were conserving energy for the hard times that seemed inevitable now. The community had begun organizing relief efforts, sharing water between farms, pooling resources to help the families hit hardest by the drought, and holding extra prayer meetings to ask for God's mercy. The Byler family lost their entire wheat crop yesterday, Sarah said softly, not looking up from the pot she was stirring. Anna came by while you were in the fields. She was trying not to cry, but I could see it in her eyes. They're talking about selling one of their horses. Jacob's stomach clenched. In their community, a family's horses weren't just transportation or farm equipment. They were partners, almost family members, carefully chosen and lovingly maintained over years or even decades. For the Bylers to consider selling a horse meant they were facing the kind of desperation that could tear a family apart. What about the Yoder farm? Jacob asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. David told Eli yesterday that they might lose the farm entirely if they can't make their mortgage payment this fall. The bank in town isn't going to care that we had a drought. Jacob closed his eyes and tried to push down the guilt that had been gnawing at him for weeks. While his neighbors watched their livelihoods disappear, his own crops continued to thrive with an almost supernatural resilience. The corn in his field stood tall and green, the leaves broad and healthy, the ears already beginning to swell with the promise of a decent harvest. His other crops, the vegetables that would feed his family through the winter, the hay that would sustain their livestock, all of them were faring better than anyone else's in the district, and at the center of it all sat the lump, unchanged and mysterious, covered in grass so green it looked like something from a fairy tale. Jacob? Sarah's voice pulled him from his thoughts. You're thinking about it again, aren't you? He didn't need to ask what she meant. The lump had become like a third presence in their marriage, always there even when they weren't talking about it directly. Sarah had grown more worried as the weeks passed, not just about the drought, but about her husband's increasingly intense focus on the thing in their field. I can't stop thinking about it, Jacob admitted. Sarah, yesterday I walked the entire perimeter of our property. I checked the soil moisture levels. I examined the root systems of our plants. I even dug test holes to see if there's some kind of underground water source that I missed. There's nothing that should explain why our crops are doing so much better than everyone else's. Sarah set down her wooden spoon and turned to face him fully. And you think that lump is responsible? I know how it sounds. I know Samuel and Eli think I'm losing my mind. But Sarah, I've been farming for 20 years. I understand soil and weather, and plant growth. What's happening in our field isn't natural. At least, it's not natural in any way that I can explain. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her brown eyes studying her husband's face with the kind of careful attention that comes from years of marriage. Jacob could see her internal struggle. The practical, sensible part of her that agreed with Samuel and Eli warring against the part that trusted her husband's judgment and couldn't ignore what she saw with her own eyes every day. What are you thinking of doing? She asked finally. I don't know. Maybe nothing. Maybe I just keep wondering about it until I drive myself crazy. Jacob ran his hands through his hair, a gesture of frustration that Sarah recognized immediately. But sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I think about all the families in our district who are struggling right now. I think about the Bilers selling their horses, about the Yoders potentially losing their farm, about young men having to leave our community to find work in the English world. And I wonder, what if there's something under that lump that could help them? What if God put it there for exactly this kind of situation? And what if there's something under there that's better left alone? Sarah countered gently, Jacob, our people have lived on this land for generations. We've survived droughts before, and economic hardships, and all kinds of challenges. We've always found a way through by relying on each other and trusting in God's plan. Maybe this is just another test of our faith. Jacob wanted to argue, but he could hear the wisdom in his wife's words. The Amish way was to accept hardship as part of life, to support one another through difficult times, and to trust that everything happened according to God's will. Digging up mysterious objects in cornfields definitely wasn't part of that tradition. You're probably right, Jacob said, though his voice lacked conviction. Maybe I should just focus on helping our neighbors in more practical ways. Sarah smiled and reached out to squeeze his hand. That sounds like the man I married. But as Jacob kissed his wife goodbye and headed out to begin his morning chores, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was making a mistake. Every instinct he had, every fiber of his being, seemed to be pulling him toward that lump in the center of his field. It was as if something was calling to him, waiting for him to find the courage to investigate. The morning passed quickly as Jacob threw himself into his work with unusual intensity. He repaired a section of fence that had been damaged by their cattle, cleaned out the chicken coop, and spent 2 hours carefully watering the vegetables in Sarah's garden. Physical labor had always been his way of working through problems, and today he hoped it might help quiet the voice in his head that kept whispering about secrets buried in the earth. Around mid-morning he was surprised to see a buggy approaching along the road to his farm. As it got closer, he recognized the distinctive gray horse and weathered black buggy that belonged to Bishop Isaiah Mast, the spiritual leader of their district and one of the most respected men in their community. Bishop Mast was in his 70s, with a long white beard and eyes that seemed to see straight through to a person's soul. He had been leading their district for over 30 years, guiding families through everything from personal crises to community disputes with a combination of biblical wisdom and practical common sense that had earned him the love and respect of everyone he served. "Good morning, Jacob," Bishop Mast called out as he climbed down from his buggy with the careful movements of a man who had lived many years and felt every one of them in his joints. "Bishop, good morning," Jacob replied, walking over to greet the older man. "This is an unexpected pleasure. What brings you to our farm today?" Bishop Mast smiled, but Jacob could see something serious in his expression. "I was hoping we could have a conversation, just the two of us. Is there somewhere we could sit and talk privately?" Jacob's stomach tightened. In their community, a visit from the bishop usually meant one of two things. Either someone was in serious trouble, or someone was about to be asked to take on a significant responsibility. Given the thoughts that had been occupying Jacob's mind lately, he suspected it might be the former. "Of course," Jacob said. "Would you like to sit on the porch? Sarah could bring us some coffee." "That would be fine." They walked to the front of the house, where a simple wooden porch offered a clear view of Jacob's fields and the mysterious lump that sat in the center of his corn crop. Bishop Mast settled into one of the handmade chairs that Jacob had crafted during the previous winter, his keen eyes immediately focusing on the object that had been causing so much discussion in their district. Sarah appeared with coffee and fresh bread, greeting the bishop with the warm respect that she showed to all the elders in their community. After she returned to the house, Bishop Mast was quiet for several minutes, sipping his coffee and studying the lump with an expression that Jacob couldn't quite read. "That's quite an unusual feature in your field," Bishop Mast said finally. "Yes, sir, it is. I've been hearing some interesting conversations about it lately. People in our district are curious about your thoughts on what might be underneath it." Jacob felt his face grow warm. "I'm sorry if I've been causing any concern in the community, Bishop. I know some people think my interest in it is excessive." Bishop Mast chuckled softly. "Jacob, I've known you since you were a boy running around in your father's fields. You've always been the type to ask questions, to wonder about things that others might simply accept. It's not necessarily a bad trait, but it can sometimes lead a person into difficult territory. Yes, sir. Tell me what you think is under there. The direct question caught Jacob off guard. He had expected the bishop to counsel him about accepting God's will, or to remind him about the importance of not letting curiosity override wisdom. He hadn't expected to be asked for his honest opinion. I don't know, Jacob said carefully, but I think it's something that's been helping my crops grow better than they should be in this drought. I think it might be something that could help other families in our district if we understood what it was. Bishop Mast nodded thoughtfully. And your brother Samuel thinks you're chasing shadows. Yes, sir, he does. What does your wife think? Jacob considered the question. She's worried about me. She thinks I'm becoming obsessed with something that's probably not important. She wants me to focus on helping our neighbors in more traditional ways. Wise woman, you're Sarah. Always has been. Bishop Mast was quiet for another long moment, his gaze fixed on the lump. Jacob, I want to tell you something that might surprise you. In the 43 years that I've been serving as a minister in this community, I've learned that God sometimes calls us to do things that don't make sense to other people. Not often, but sometimes. Jacob looked up in surprise. This wasn't the conversation he had expected to have. I've also learned, Bishop Mast continued, that there's a difference between being called to do something and simply wanting to do something because we're curious. The challenge is knowing which one is which. How do you tell the difference? Prayer. Lots of prayer. And careful consideration of whether your actions would serve God's people or just satisfy your own desires. Bishop Mast set down his coffee cup and leaned forward slightly. Jacob, I'm going to ask you a difficult question, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. If you discovered that there was nothing under that lump, nothing unusual, nothing helpful, just an old tree stump or a pile of rocks, would you be disappointed? Jacob thought about it honestly. Yes, sir, I would. And if you discovered something that could genuinely help the families in our district who are struggling with this drought, but investigating it meant going against the advice of people you love and trust, would you still want to pursue it? I think so, yes. Bishop Mast sat back in his chair and studied Jacob's face for a long time. I'm going to tell you something, Jacob, and I want you to keep it between us for now. 3 other families in our district have come to me in the past 2 weeks asking for help making difficult decisions about their farms. The Millers, not your family, but David Miller's family over on Peachy Road. They're considering moving to Ohio, where his brother has offered them work. The Zooks are talking about taking a loan from an English bank, which goes against everything we believe about debt and simple living. And the Kime family is discussing whether their oldest son should take a job at the factory in Lancaster, working alongside English people and being exposed to influences that could pull him away from our community. Jacob felt his stomach drop. These were good families, faithful people who had been part of their district for generations. The idea that they might be forced to make choices that could fundamentally change their way of life was heartbreaking. Bishop, I had no idea things were that serious for so many people. They are, and I've been praying about it constantly, asking God to show me how I can best serve our people during this difficult time. Bishop Mast paused and looked directly at Jacob. Last night, I had a dream. In the dream, I was standing in your field, looking at that lump, and I heard a voice telling me that sometimes the answers we need are right in front of us, waiting for someone with enough faith to uncover them. Jacob stared at the bishop in amazement. You think I should dig it up? I think you should pray about it. Seriously, deeply, with your whole heart. And if after prayer you feel called to investigate what's under there, then you should do it with the support and blessing of your community, rather than in secret or against the wishes of people who love you. What about Samuel and Eli? What about the people who think I'm being foolish? Bishop Mast smiled. Jacob, if God is calling you to do this, then he'll provide a way for it to happen that brings the community together, rather than tearing it apart. But that's going to require wisdom, patience, and a lot of careful conversation with the people who are concerned about you. They sat in comfortable silence for several more minutes. both men lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Bishop Mast stood up and prepared to leave. "Thank you for the coffee, Jacob. Please give my regards to Sarah." "Of course. Bishop, can I ask you one more question?" "Certainly. Do you really think God might have put something under that lump to help our community?" Bishop Mast looked out across Jacob's thriving fields, then back at the mysterious mound that had become the center of so much speculation and concern. "Jacob, I've seen God work in stranger ways than that. The question isn't whether he could do such a thing. The question is whether he's calling you to be the person who discovers it." After the bishop left, Jacob spent the rest of the day thinking about their conversation. As evening approached and he finished his chores, he found himself standing once again at the edge of his field, staring at the lump that had dominated his thoughts for so long. The setting sun cast long shadows across the corn, and in the fading light, the grass on top of the lump seemed to glow with an inner radiance that he had never noticed before. As he watched, a gentle breeze stirred the stalks around him, creating a sound like whispered conversations that he couldn't quite understand. And for just a moment, Jacob could have sworn he heard something else, a sound so faint he might have imagined it, coming from deep beneath the earth. It sounded almost like singing. The singing haunted Jacob's dreams that night. In his sleep, he found himself walking through his cornfield under a star-filled sky, following a melody that seemed to rise from the earth itself. The song was wordless but somehow filled with meaning, speaking of patience and hope, and something precious hidden away until the right moment arrived. When he reached the lump in his dream, it glowed with a soft golden light, and he could see shapes moving beneath the surface like fish swimming in a deep, clear pond. He woke just before dawn, with tears on his cheeks and a certainty in his heart that he couldn't explain or ignore. Sarah was already awake beside him, her eyes reflecting the pale light filtering through their bedroom window. "You were talking in your sleep," she said softly. "Something about music." Jacob sat up and ran his hands through his hair, trying to shake off the lingering effects of the dream. "I think I'm losing my mind, Sarah. Either that, or something very strange is happening on our farm. Tell me about the dream." Jacob described what he had experienced, watching his wife's expression grow more concerned with each detail. When he finished, Sarah was quiet for a long time, her fingers unconsciously tracing patterns on the quilt that her mother had made for their wedding. "Jacob, I need to tell you something, and I need you to promise not to think I'm as crazy as you're worried you might be." "What is it?" "Yesterday, while you were talking with Bishop Mast, I was working in the garden near the kitchen window. I could hear the two of you talking, but I wasn't really listening. I was focused on my tomato. But around the same time you were having your conversation, I started hearing something else." Jacob's heart began to beat faster. "What kind of something?" "Music. Very faint, like someone humming a lullaby very far away. At first I thought it might be one of the neighbor children playing outside, but when I looked around, there was no one there, and the sound seemed to be coming from—" Sarah paused and looked toward their bedroom window, which faced the cornfield. "From the direction of that lump." Jacob stared at his wife in amazement. "You heard singing too?" "I heard something. I don't know if I'd call it singing exactly, but it was musical. And Jacob, it made me feel peaceful, like everything was going to be all right somehow." They looked at each other in the growing morning light, both wondering if they were sharing some kind of collective delusion or if something genuinely extraordinary was happening on their property. "We need to tell someone about this," Sarah said finally. "Samuel and Eli already think I'm obsessed with that lump for no good reason. If I start talking about mysterious music coming from underground, they're going to want to call a doctor." "What about Bishop Mast? He seemed to take your concerns seriously yesterday." Jacob considered this. The bishop had certainly been more open-minded than he'd expected, and his mention of a dream about the lump suggested that maybe Jacob wasn't the only one experiencing unusual things. "Maybe," Jacob said, "let me think about it while I do the morning chores. We don't want to make any hasty decisions about this." But as Jacob went about feeding the animals and checking on his crops, he couldn't stop thinking about the dream and Sarah's confession about hearing music. By the time he returned to the house for breakfast, he had made up his mind. "I'm going to talk to Bishop Mast again," he told Sarah as she placed a plate of eggs and toast in front of him. "And I think I'm going to ask him to come out here with me tonight, after dark, to see if we can hear the music together." Sarah nodded slowly. "That seems wise. If the bishop experiences what we're experiencing, then we'll know we're not imagining things. And if he doesn't, then maybe we need to consider that we're both under a lot of stress about the drought and our neighbors' problems, and our minds are playing tricks on us." Jacob spent the morning working in his fields, but his attention kept drifting to the lump and the mystery it represented. The corn around it seemed even more vigorous today, the leaves a deeper green, the stalks standing straighter and taller than anything else in the area. He walked the entire perimeter of the strange circular pattern that his crops had formed around the mound, trying to find some rational explanation for what he was seeing. It was while he was crouched down examining the root system of a particularly healthy corn plant that he heard footsteps behind him. Still convinced there's something magical about that pile of dirt, Eli's voice carried a mixture of affection and exasperation that Jacob had been hearing a lot lately. Jacob stood up and turned to face his friend, who was approaching with Samuel close behind. Both men looked tired and worried, the strain of the ongoing drought evident in their faces and posture. "How are your crops doing today?" Jacob asked instead of answering Eli's question directly. "Badly," Samuel replied honestly. "I lost another 3 rows of corn overnight. The plants are just giving up, and the Stoltzfus family's wheat field is completely destroyed now. We came to ask you a favor," Eli said. "Ruth and I were wondering if you might be able to spare some of your harvest this year to help feed our family through the winter. We'll pay you what we can, and I'll work extra hours, helping with your farm to make up the difference." The request hit Jacob like a physical blow. Eli Stoltzfus was one of the proudest, most self-sufficient men he knew. For him to ask for help feeding his family meant that things were even worse than Jacob had realized. "Of course," Jacob said immediately. "You don't need to pay me anything, and you certainly don't need to work for it. We're family, Eli. We take care of each other." "I appreciate that, Jacob. I really do. But I need to contribute something. A man has to feel like he's earning his way in the world." Samuel was looking around Jacob's field with an expression of bewilderment. "Jacob, I don't understand how your crops are doing so well. We've had the exact same weather, the same soil conditions. Your field should look like ours do." "That's what I've been trying to tell you," Jacob said. "Something about this land is different. Something is helping my crops grow better than they should be." "And you think it has something to do with that lump?" Eli gestured toward the center of the field. Samuel and Eli exchanged the look that Jacob had grown to dread, the look that said they thought their friend was grasping at supernatural explanations for what had to be natural phenomena. "Jacob," Samuel said patiently, "even if there was something under there that was somehow affecting your crops, what would you propose to do about it? Dig it up and see what happens? Maybe?" "That's not a maybe question, brother. That's a yes or no question. Are you seriously considering digging up that lump?" Jacob looked at his brother and his best friend, 2 men he had trusted with his life countless times, 2 men whose opinions mattered more to him than almost anyone else in the world. He thought about telling them about the dreams, about the music that both he and Sarah had heard, about Bishop Mast's surprising openness to the possibility that God might be working through the mystery in his field. But looking at their skeptical faces, he realized that none of those things would convince them. If anything, they would probably make Samuel and Eli more worried about his mental state. "I'm considering it," Jacob said quietly. "No." Samuel's voice carried the authority of an older brother and a respected member of their community. "Jacob, I forbid it. As your brother and as someone who loves you, I'm telling you that you cannot dig up that lump. You'll damage your field, you might hurt yourself, and you'll make a fool of yourself in front of the entire district. You can't forbid me to do something on my own property, Samuel. Can't." "Jacob, if you're not thinking clearly, and I'm starting to wonder if you are, then it's my responsibility as your family to step in and keep you from making a serious mistake." The conversation was heading in a direction that Jacob didn't want it to go. He could feel the tension building between them, the kind of tension that could damage relationships and split families if it wasn't handled carefully. "Let's all take a deep breath here," Eli said, stepping between the two brothers. "We're all under a lot of stress because of the drought, and we're all worried about our families and our community. The last thing we need is to start fighting with each other." Samuel and Jacob both nodded, but the underlying disagreement hadn't been resolved. "Jacob," Eli continued, "I understand that you're looking for answers, for some way to help everyone who's struggling right now. But you have to consider the possibility that there is no magical solution to our problems. Sometimes bad things happen to good people, and the only thing we can do is support each other and trust that God will see us through. What if God is trying to show us a solution and we're too stubborn to look at it?" Jacob asked. "Then he'll find another way to make it clear to us," Samuel replied. "God doesn't work through mysterious lumps in cornfields, Jacob. He works through community, through faith, through the love and support we show each other during difficult times." Jacob wanted to argue, but he could see that his brother and friend had already made up their minds. Nothing he could say was going to change their opinion about the situation. "All right," Jacob said finally. "I'll try to focus on more practical ways of helping people." It was the same promise he had made before, and like before, it seemed to satisfy Samuel and Eli without actually committing Jacob to anything specific. After they left, Jacob spent the rest of the day trying to throw himself into normal farm work, but his mind kept returning to the conversation and to the bigger questions that it raised. What did it mean to trust in God's plan when that plan seemed to include watching good people suffer through no fault of their own? What was the difference between faith and fatalism? And if God really was trying to show them something through the mysterious lump in his field, what would it take for other people to see it? As evening approached, Jacob made his way to Bishop Mast's house, a modest farmhouse about 2 miles from his own property. The bishop was sitting on his front porch, reading his Bible in the fading light. "Jacob," Bishop Mast said, looking up with a smile, "I was wondering if I might see you again soon. How are you feeling about our conversation yesterday?" "Confused, most." "Bishop, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me honestly whether you think I'm losing my mind." Bishop Mast gestured to the chair beside him. "Sit down and tell me what's troubling you." Jacob described his dream from the night before, and Sarah's experience of hearing music coming from the direction of the lump. He watched Bishop Mast's face carefully for any sign of skepticism or concern, but the older man's expression remained thoughtful and open. "And what do you think these experiences mean?" Bishop Mast asked, when Jacob finished. "I think something under that lump is trying to communicate with us. I think it's been waiting for the right time, and maybe that time is now, when our community really needs help. And your brother and Eli, what do they think about these new developments?" "I haven't told them. They already think I'm becoming obsessed with something that doesn't matter. If I tell them I'm hearing voices from underground, they'll probably try to have me committed to an asylum." Bishop Mast was quiet for a long time, his fingers absently turning the pages of his Bible as he considered Jacob's words. "Jacob, I want you to do something for me. I want you to go home tonight and spend an hour in prayer, asking God to show you clearly what he wants you to do about this situation. Don't ask him to confirm what you already want to do. Ask him to show you his will, even if it's different from what you're hoping for. All right. And tomorrow evening, if you still feel called to investigate what's under that lump, I want you to invite me to come to your farm after dark. We'll stand in your field together and see if we can hear this music you've been experiencing." Jacob stared at the bishop in surprise. "You'd be willing to do that?" "Jacob, I've been ministering to this community for more than 40 years. I've learned to recognize when God is moving in someone's life, even when the ways he moves don't match what I might expect. I can't promise that I'll hear what you're hearing, but I can promise that I'll approach the situation with an open heart and mind. And if you do hear something, if we both experience whatever is happening out there, then we'll have a very interesting conversation about what to do next." Jacob walked home as the last light faded from the sky, his mind full of possibilities and concerns. The bishop's willingness to take his experiences seriously was encouraging, but it also made the whole situation feel more real and more frightening. What if they did hear the music together? What if Bishop Mast confirmed that something extraordinary was happening on Jacob's farm? What would that mean for their community, for their way of life, for everything they believed about how God worked in the world? As he approached his house, Jacob could see Sarah waiting for him on the porch, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the evening chill. "How did it go with the bishop?" she asked, as he climbed the steps. "Better than I expected. He wants to come here tomorrow night to see if he can hear the music too." Sarah's eyes widened. "Really? He's taking this seriously?" "It seems like he is." "Sarah, what if we're right about this? What if there really is something under that lump that could help our neighbors? Then we'll deal with whatever comes next," Sarah said, taking his hand. "Together, like we always do." That night, Jacob followed Bishop Mast's advice and spent an hour in deep prayer, asking God to show him clearly what he should do about the mystery in his field. As he prayed, he felt a sense of peace settle over him, along with a growing conviction that he was being called to act, regardless of what other people thought about his decision. And as he finally drifted off to sleep, Jacob could hear it again, the faint, beautiful music rising from the earth, calling to him with a voice that seemed to speak directly to his soul. The next evening arrived with an unusual stillness that seemed to blanket the entire countryside. Jacob had spent the day working mechanically through his chores, his mind focused on the approaching meeting with Bishop Mast. Sarah had been unusually quiet as well, moving through the house with the careful deliberation of someone preparing for something momentous. Neither of them spoke much during their simple dinner of bread, cheese, and preserved vegetables, but the air between them hummed with anticipation and nervous energy. As the sun began to set, Jacob found himself pacing the length of their front porch, checking the road every few minutes for signs of the bishop's distinctive grey horse and black buggy. Sarah joined him outside, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing her heaviest shawl despite the warm evening air. "Are you nervous?" she asked, settling into the chair beside him. "Terrified," Jacob admitted. "What if he doesn't hear anything? What if this whole thing has been in our heads, and we're about to embarrass ourselves in front of the most respected man in our community? And what if he does hear something?" Sarah countered. "What if we're right, and there really is something extraordinary happening here? That might be even more frightening than being wrong." Jacob was about to respond when they both heard the familiar clip-clop of horse hooves on the dirt road. Bishop Mast's buggy appeared around the bend, moving at the steady, unhurried pace that characterized everything about the older man's approach to life. "Good evening, Jacob." "Sarah," Bishop Mast called out as he climbed down from his buggy with careful movement. At 73, he still moved with purpose and dignity, but Jacob could see that the years were beginning to weigh on him more heavily than they had just a few months earlier. "Thank you for coming, Bishop," Jacob said, walking over to help secure the horse. "I know this is an unusual request." "I've had many unusual requests in my years of ministry," Bishop Mast replied with a gentle smile. "This one is certainly interesting, but not the strangest thing I've ever been asked to do." Sarah offered the bishop coffee, which he accepted gratefully, and the 3 of them sat on the porch as the last light faded from the sky. The bishop seemed in no hurry to begin their investigation, instead asking about their crops, their family, and their thoughts about the various relief efforts the community had been organizing to help families affected by the drought. "The situation is becoming more serious every day," Bishop Mast said, his voice carrying the weight of a man who had been listening to increasingly desperate conversations all week. "The Hostetler family made the decision yesterday to sell their farm and move to Ohio, where they have relatives who can help them start over. 3 more families are seriously considering similar moves." Jacob felt his stomach clench. The Hostetlers had been part of their district for 4 generations. The idea that they were being forced to abandon their ancestral land because of one bad year was heartbreaking. "What about help from outside the community?" "Sarah, surely there are English organizations that provide disaster relief for situations like this." Bishop Mast shook his head sadly. There are, but accepting that kind of help would mean allowing outsiders to become involved in our community affairs, to examine our finances, to make decisions about how we live our lives. It would compromise our independence and our ability to maintain our way of life. Most of our families would rather struggle on their own than accept help that comes with those kinds of strings attached. They sat in contemplative silence as full darkness settled over the countryside. In the distance they could hear the normal sounds of evening, cattle settling in their pastures, horses moving restlessly in their stalls, the occasional call of a night bird. But underneath these familiar sounds, Jacob began to detect something else, a faint, almost musical humming that seemed to rise from the direction of his cornfield. "Do you hear that?" Jacob asked quietly. Bishop Mast tilted his head slightly, his expression growing more focused. "I hear something. It's very faint. It gets stronger when we get closer to the field," Sarah said. "Should we walk out there?" Bishop Mast nodded, and the three of them made their way slowly across the yard toward the edge of Jacob's cornfield. As they walked, the mysterious sound became more distinct, definitely musical, definitely coming from the direction of the lump, and definitely unlike anything any of them had ever heard before. "My word," Bishop Mast whispered, when they reached the edge of the field, "that is extraordinary." The music was clearer now, a wordless melody that seemed to speak of longing and patience and hope deferred. It rose and fell in gentle waves, sometimes barely audible, sometimes strong enough that Jacob could feel it resonating in his chest. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, filled with a sadness that somehow contained its own comfort. "It's coming from the lump," Jacob said, pointing toward the center of the field where the mysterious mound sat bathed in starlight. Bishop Mast began walking toward the sound without another word, moving through the tall corn stalks with surprising grace for a man his age. Jacob and Sarah followed close behind, both of them amazed by the bishop's apparent acceptance of what they were experiencing. As they drew closer to the lump, the music grew stronger and more complex. What had seemed like a simple melody from a distance revealed itself to be an intricate harmony, as if multiple voices were singing together in perfect synchronization. The grass covering the mound seemed to shimmer in the starlight, each blade moving in time with the rhythm of the mysterious song. "How long has this been happening?" Bishop Mast asked, his voice filled with wonder. "I first heard it 3 nights ago," Jacob replied. "Sarah heard it the day you came to visit, but I think it might have been going on longer than that. I just wasn't listening carefully enough to notice it." Bishop Mast approached the lump slowly, his movements reverent and careful. When he was standing directly beside it, he knelt down and placed his hand gently on the grass-covered surface. The moment his palm made contact with the earth, the music swelled to a volume that filled the entire field. But more than that, the melody changed, becoming richer and more joyful, as if whatever was beneath the surface was responding to his touch with excitement and relief. "Dear God in heaven," Bishop Mast breathed, his eyes wide with amazement. "There's something alive under here." "Alive?" Sarah asked, moving closer despite her obvious nervousness. "I can feel it," Bishop Mast said, his hand still pressed against the grass. "There's a heartbeat, or something like a heartbeat, and warmth. Whatever this is, it's been waiting here for a very long time." Jacob knelt beside the bishop and placed his own hand on the lump. Immediately, he felt what Bishop Mast was describing, a gentle, steady pulsing that seemed to sync with his own heartbeat, and a warmth that radiated up through the earth like sunshine stored in the soil. "What do you think it is?" Jacob asked. "I don't know," Bishop Mast admitted, "but I think it's been trying to communicate with us, and I think it needs our help." Sarah joined them, kneeling on the other side of the lump, and placing both of her hands on the mysterious surface. The moment she made contact, the music shifted again, becoming even more complex and beautiful. Now it sounded like a full choir singing in harmony, voices layered upon voices in a symphony of hope and longing that brought tears to all of their eyes. "It's asking us to dig," Sarah said suddenly, her voice filled with certainty. "I don't know how I know that, but I can feel it. Whatever is down there has been waiting for someone to uncover it. and it's running out of time. Bishop Mast looked at Jacob with an expression that mixed wonder with deep concern. Jacob, if we do this, if we dig up whatever is buried here, there's no going back. This will change everything for our community, one way or another. What if we don't do it? Jacob asked. What if we walk away and pretend this never happened? How many more families will we lose? How many more people will be forced to abandon their way of life because we were too afraid to investigate something that might help them? Bishop Mast was quiet for a long moment, his hands still pressed against the warm earth, his ear tuned to the beautiful, otherworldly music that surrounded them. Finally, he looked up at Jacob, with a mixture of determination and fear in his aged eyes. We'll need help, he said. This is too big for just the three of us. We'll need tools and strong backs and people who can keep a secret until we know what we're dealing with. Samuel and Eli will never agree to this, Jacob said. Then we don't tell Samuel and Eli, Bishop Mast replied. At least, not yet. There are other men in our community, younger men who might be more open to the possibility that God works in mysterious ways. Men whose families are struggling enough that they'd be willing to take a chance on something unusual if it might help their neighbors. Jacob thought about the families in their district who were facing the hardest times, the Yorders with their mortgage problems, the Kame family whose son was considering factory work, the Millers who were thinking about moving to Ohio. All of them had sons or sons-in-law who might be persuaded to help with an excavation if they understood what was at stake. When? Sarah asked. Tomorrow night, Bishop Mast said decisively. I'll spend the day talking to the men I think we can trust. We'll meet here after dark and see what God has been waiting to show us. As they walked back toward the house, the music followed them, seeming to fade reluctantly as they moved away from the lump. By the time they reached the porch, it was barely audible again, just a whisper of melody on the evening breeze. Bishop Mast paused before climbing into his buggy, his expression grave. Jacob, I want you to understand something. What we heard tonight, what we felt, it's not something that can be explained by our usual understanding of how the world works. If we proceed with this excavation, we're stepping into territory that none of us have ever explored before. Do you think we're making a mistake? Jacob asked. I think we're following a calling that's bigger than our fears, Bishop Mast replied. But I also think we need to be prepared for the possibility that what we find tomorrow night might challenge everything we thought we knew about God's plan for our community. After the bishop left, Jacob and Sarah sat on their porch for another hour, listening to the faint music that continued to drift across their field. Neither of them spoke much, but both understood that they had crossed a threshold from which there could be no return. Are you frightened? Sarah asked as they finally prepared to go inside. Yes, Jacob admitted, but I'm also more hopeful than I've been in months. Sarah, what if this really is an answer to our community's problems? What if God really has provided something to help us get through this crisis? And what if it's something else entirely? What if we're about to unleash something that we don't understand and can't control? Jacob took his wife's hand and squeezed it gently. Then we'll face whatever comes together, with faith and with the support of our community. That's all we can do. That night, Jacob's dreams were filled with music and light, with visions of his neighbors' faces transformed by hope, and with the sound of children laughing in fields where green things grew in abundance despite the drought that had ravaged the land. When he woke before dawn, he felt a certainty in his heart that whatever they discovered beneath the lump, it would change their lives forever. The day passed slowly, each hour feeling like an eternity as Jacob went through the motions of his normal routine, while his mind raced with anticipation and anxiety. Sarah seemed equally distracted, starting tasks and then abandoning them, checking and rechecking their preparations for what might be a very unusual evening. Around midday, Bishop Mast returned with 4 other men. David Yorder, whose family was struggling with mortgage payments, Thomas Keem, whose son was considering factory work, Aaron Miller from Peachy Road, whose family was thinking about moving to Ohio, and surprisingly Daniel Stoltzfus, Eli's younger brother, who was known for his willingness to consider unconventional solutions to difficult problems. These men have agreed to help us tonight, Bishop Mast said simply. I've explained the situation to them, and they've all heard the music for themselves. They understand the risks, and they're willing to proceed. Jacob looked at the faces of these men, all of them good, faithful members of their community, all of them facing the kinds of hardships that could destroy families and scatter communities to the four winds. He saw hope in their eyes, mixed with fear and determination. "Thank you," Jacob said simply. "All of you. This means more to me than I can express." "Don't thank us yet," Daniel Stoltzfus said with a grin that reminded Jacob strongly of his older brother, Eli. "Wait until we see what we're digging up. If it turns out to be nothing but an old tree stump, you might be buying all of us dinner for the next year to make up for the embarrassment." The other men laughed, but Jacob could hear the underlying tension in their voices. They were all afraid, but they were also desperate enough to try something that went against everything they had been taught about accepting their circumstances, with patience and faith. As evening approached, the 6 men gathered in Jacob's field, carrying shovels, pickaxes, and lanterns. The mysterious music was stronger than ever, seeming to welcome them as they approached the lump that had been the focus of so much speculation and concern. "Before we begin," Bishop Mast said, "I think we should pray." The men formed a circle around the lump, bowing their heads, as Bishop Mast offered a prayer for wisdom, for protection, and for the strength to accept whatever they might find beneath the earth. As he spoke, the music seemed to quiet slightly, as if whatever was buried there was listening to their words with the same attention they were paying to its mysterious song. "Amen," they said together, and then, without another word, they began to dig. The earth came away easily, almost as if it wanted to be moved. Within minutes, they had cleared away the grass and begun exposing the curved surface of something large and smooth beneath the soil. As more of the object was revealed, it became clear that they were uncovering something extraordinary, a dome-shaped structure made of a material that none of them had ever seen before. "It's warm," David Yoder said, his voice filled with wonder as he brushed dirt away from the smooth surface. "And it feels like it's breathing." The material was translucent, with a pearl-like quality that seemed to glow from within. As they dug deeper, they could see that the structure was much larger than the lump had suggested. It extended down into the earth much further than they had expected, and its base was considerably wider than its top. "Look," Thomas Kane said suddenly, pointing to a section of the dome where the translucent material had become completely clear. "There's something inside." The men gathered around the clear section, holding their lanterns high to illuminate whatever lay within the mysterious structure. What they saw took their breath away and left them staring in speechless amazement. Inside the dome, suspended in what appeared to be a thick, luminous liquid, was a figure unlike anything they had ever imagined. It was humanoid in shape, but clearly not human, taller than any man, with features that were both beautiful and alien, and skin that seemed to shimmer with the same pearl-like quality as the dome itself. The figure's eyes were closed, its arms folded peacefully across its chest, and its entire form radiated a sense of profound serenity. "Dear God," Bishop Mast whispered. "It's an angel." For several minutes none of the men could speak. They stood in stunned silence around the partially excavated dome, their lanterns casting dancing shadows across the translucent surface that held the sleeping figure. The music that had drawn them to this moment continued to rise from within the structure, but now they could see its source. The angel's chest rose and fell in a rhythm that matched the melodic breathing they had been hearing for days. "Is it alive?" Aaron Miller whispered, his voice barely audible above the ethereal song. "I think it's sleeping," Sarah said softly. She had been watching from the edge of the excavation, too nervous to leave Jacob alone for such a momentous event. Now she approached the dome with the careful reverence of someone entering a sacred space. "Look at how peaceful it appears." Daniel Stoltzfus, who was known throughout their district for his practical approach to even the most unusual situations, walked slowly around the exposed portion of the dome, studying it from every angle. "This structure," he said, "it's not made of any material I've ever seen, the way it's preserved whatever is inside." He shook his head in amazement. This is beyond anything we understand about the world. Bishop Mast knelt beside the clear section of the dome and placed his weathered hand against the smooth surface. The moment his palm made contact, the music swelled and the pearl-like glow within the structure intensified. The angel's eyes fluttered, then slowly opened, revealing irises of the deepest blue any of them had ever seen. The being inside the dome looked directly at Bishop Mast through the translucent barrier, and when their eyes met, the elderly minister's face was transformed by an expression of profound peace and understanding. For nearly a minute, they simply looked at each other, and in that silent communion, something passed between them that left Bishop Mast with tears streaming down his face. "It's trying to speak," Bishop Mast said, his voice filled with wonder. "I can hear its voice in my mind." "What is it saying?" Jacob asked, moving closer to his spiritual leader. Bishop Mast was quiet for a long moment, his eyes closed, his hands still pressed against the dome. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of prophecy. "It says it has been waiting for our community to face a crisis great enough that we would be willing to look beyond our usual understanding of how God works in the world. It says it was sent here generations ago, planted in this field by God's own hand, to sleep until the moment when our people would need divine intervention to survive." The angel within the dome raised one graceful hand and pressed it against the interior surface, directly opposite Bishop Mast's palm. The glow intensified further, and suddenly all of the men could hear the being's voice resonating in their minds, speaking not in words but in pure understanding that bypassed language entirely. "I am Raphael," the voice said, filling their consciousness with warmth and light. "I am the angel of healing, sent to tend to the wounds of the earth and the sorrows of those who call upon the Most High with pure hearts. I have slept in your field for 3 generations of your people, waiting for the time when the land would cry out for restoration and the community would cry out for hope." David Yoder stepped forward, his eyes wide with amazement. "Are you here to end the drought?" The angel's response flowed through all of their minds simultaneously. "I am here to heal what has been broken, but the healing must come through your hands, your hearts, your willingness to trust in miracles, even when they appear in forms you do not expect." The drought is a symptom of a deeper wounding of the earth, caused by generations of taking without giving, of harvesting without honoring the sacred contract between humanity and the soil that sustains you. "What do we need to do?" Thomas Came asked, his voice urgent with the desperation of a man whose family was facing financial ruin. "Release me from this sleeping chamber," Raphael replied. "Allow me to walk among you for 7 days. In that time I will teach you ancient ways of caring for the land, ways that your ancestors knew but that have been forgotten in the rush toward easier methods and quicker profits. I will show you how to call the rains, how to bless the soil, how to create abundance that will sustain not just this season but generations to come." Aaron Miller looked around nervously at the other men. "How do we release you? How do we open this chamber?" Raphael's response came with a sense of gentle amusement. "The chamber opens not with tools or force, but with faith. Each of you must place your hand upon the surface and speak aloud your willingness to serve as instruments of healing for your community. When all present have made this commitment, the barriers between us will dissolve." Bishop Mast looked around at the men who had gathered to help with the excavation. "This is not a decision any of us should make lightly. If we release this being, this angel, we are accepting responsibility for whatever changes its presence brings to our community. Our lives, our families, our entire way of living may be transformed in ways we cannot predict or control." Bishop Daniel Stoltzfus said, "With respect, our lives are going to be transformed anyway if this drought continues. The question is whether we'll be transformed by loss and scattering, or by something that might offer hope and restoration." "My farm is 3 weeks away from foreclosure," David Yoder added quietly. "My children are asking me why God is letting our family lose everything we've worked for. If there's a chance, even a small chance, that this being can help us save our community, I'm willing to take that risk." One by one, Each man voiced his agreement. Even Jacob, who had started this entire journey by questioning a mysterious lump in his cornfield, felt a moment of profound uncertainty as he contemplated what they were about to do. But when he thought about the families in their district who were facing impossible choices, when he remembered the music he had heard calling to him night after night, he knew that they had already passed the point of no return. "Sarah," Jacob said, turning to his wife, "this decision affects you too. If we do this, if we release this angel, our lives will never be the same." Sarah looked at the peaceful figure within the dome, at the hope shining in the eyes of men she had known her entire life, at the husband she loved and trusted above all others. "Jacob, I heard the music too. I felt the call just as strongly as you did. If God has sent this being to help our community, then we have to trust that he will guide us through whatever comes next." Bishop Mast nodded slowly. "Then we are in agreement. But before we proceed, I want everyone to understand that what we are about to do goes far beyond the experience of our fathers and grandfathers. We are entering territory that will test our faith, our wisdom, and our commitment to each other in ways we cannot imagine. Are we prepared for that?" "Yes," they said in unison, their voices carrying across the night-shrouded field with a conviction that surprised even themselves. Bishop Mast placed both hands on the dome and spoke in a voice that carried the authority of decades of spiritual leadership. "Isaiah Mast, willingly serve as an instrument of healing for my community, trusting in God's wisdom and mercy to guide our steps." The pearl-like surface beneath his hands grew warmer and began to emit a soft musical tone. David Yoder stepped forward next, placing his hands beside the bishop's. "I, David Yoder, willingly serve as an instrument of healing for my community, trusting in God's wisdom and mercy to guide our steps." When Raphael finally emerged from the cornfield to address the gathered community, the silence was so complete that the only sounds were the gentle patter of rain on leaves and the soft breathing of people who were witnessing the impossible. "Children of faith," Raphael began, his voice carrying clearly across the field without any need for him to raise it. "I greet you in the name of the one who loves you beyond measure, who has seen your struggles and heard your prayers, who has sent me to walk among you as a sign of his unending care." A small child broke free from her mother's grasp and ran toward the angel, her arms outstretched in the fearless way that only children possess. Raphael knelt to meet her, gathering the little girl into his luminous embrace, while her parents watched in amazement. "Don't be afraid," Raphael said, his words meant for the child but clearly intended for the entire gathering. "I am here to bring healing, to teach you ancient songs that call rain from the heavens, to show you how to plant seeds that will grow into abundance beyond your wildest dreams." The angel stood, still holding the child, and spread his wings wide. As he did, the rain intensified, but instead of driving the people to seek shelter, it seemed to fill them with energy and joy. Children began to laugh and dance in the downpour, while their parents stood transfixed by the beauty of the moment. "Tomorrow," Raphael continued, "the real teaching begins. But tonight, simply rejoice in the knowledge that your time of suffering is ending and your season of abundance is about to begin." As the angel spoke, something extraordinary happened to every person present. The elderly felt their joints loosen and their backs straighten. The sick felt strength flowing back into their bodies. The despairing felt hope rekindling in their hearts. And everyone, from the youngest child to the most senior member of their community, felt the unmistakable presence of divine love surrounding them like a warm embrace. Jacob stood with Sarah at the edge of the crowd, watching their neighbors experience the miracle he had been called to help bring about. The mysterious lump that had puzzled him for 5 years had revealed its secret at last, and that secret was transforming not just their crops and their weather, but the very hearts and souls of everyone in their community. "This is just the beginning," Sarah whispered, her hand finding Jacob's in the rain-soaked darkness. Jacob squeezed her hand and smiled, his heart full of gratitude for the journey that had led them to this moment. The best beginnings always start with someone willing to dig a little deeper than everyone else thinks is wise. 6 months later, Jacob Miller stood in the same spot where he had first noticed the mysterious lump that had changed everything. The field before him bore no resemblance to the drought-stricken land that had worried him through that terrible summer. Where once there had been struggling corn stalks and yellowing leaves, now there stretched the most abundant harvest anyone in Lancaster County had seen in living memory. The corn stood tall and proud, ears so heavy and full that some stalks required extra support to keep from bending under the weight of their bounty. But it wasn't just Jacob's field that had been transformed. Every farm in their district now showed the same miraculous abundance. The ancient techniques that Raphael had taught them during his 7-day visit had spread through their community like wildfire, passed from neighbor to neighbor with the enthusiasm of people who had discovered genuine treasure. Songs for calling rain, methods for enriching soil using nothing but prayer and specific plantings, ways of reading the earth's needs that their great-grandfathers had known but that had been forgotten in more recent generations. Sarah joined Jacob at the edge of their field, her arms around their newest addition, a baby daughter born just 2 weeks earlier, as healthy and beautiful as any child their community had ever welcomed. The birth had been attended by Martha Byler, the district's most experienced midwife, who had declared it the easiest delivery she had ever witnessed, with the mother showing strength and vitality that seemed almost supernatural. "She's going to grow up in a different world than we did," Sarah said softly, gazing down at their sleeping infant. "A world where miracles are remembered instead of forgotten, where people understand that God's love can manifest in ways that go beyond anything we learned in Sunday school." Jacob touched his daughter's tiny hand, marveling at the perfection of her small fingers. They had decided to name her Hope, not just because she represented their personal joy, but because she had been born into a community that had learned to recognize divine intervention when it appeared in their midst. "The Yoder family asked me yesterday if we thought Raphael would ever return," Jacob said. "David said his youngest son asks about the angel every night before bed, wondering if he'll wake up one morning and find those magnificent wings in their cornfield." Sarah smiled. "What did you tell them?" "I told them what the angel told us on his last night here, that he would always be with us in the knowledge he shared, in the songs he taught us, in the understanding that God's provision is as boundless as his love, that his physical presence was just the beginning of the miracle, not the end of it." As they spoke, they could see their neighbors working in their own transformed field. The Byler family, who had been preparing to sell their horses just months earlier, now owned the finest herd in 3 counties, with animals so healthy and spirited that buyers came from as far away as Ohio to purchase breeding stock. The Stoltzfus family's wheat had yielded triple the normal harvest, allowing them not only to feed their own family through the winter, but to share abundantly with others. Most remarkably, the Hostetler family had returned from Ohio, drawn back by reports of the miraculous changes in their home district. They had reclaimed their farm and found it more fertile than when they had left it, as if the land itself had been waiting for their return. "Jacob," a familiar voice called from the road. Bishop Mast was approaching, but instead of his usual slow, careful movements, he walked with the spring in his step of a man half his age. The healing touch that Raphael had given him on that first morning had proven to be permanent, restoring not just his physical vitality, but his sense of wonder about God's continuing presence in their community. "Good afternoon, Bishop," Jacob replied. "How was the council meeting?" Bishop Mast's expression grew serious as he approached the young family. "That's actually what I wanted to discuss with you. The meeting was complicated." Jacob felt a familiar tightness in his stomach. In the months since Raphael's visit, their district's unprecedented prosperity had attracted attention from outside their community. English newspapers had written articles about the miracle of Lancaster County. Religious scholars had requested permission to study their farming techniques, and government agricultural experts had demanded explanations for crop yields that defied scientific understanding. "What kind of complicated?" Sarah asked. "The state agricultural department is sending a team of investigators next week. They want to examine our soil, test our seeds, Interview our farmers about their method. They're convinced we're using some kind of undisclosed fertilizer or genetic modification that we're hiding from the authorities. Jacob sighed. They had known this day would come eventually. The dramatic transformation of their district's agricultural output was too significant to remain unnoticed by the outside world indefinitely. What did the council decide? Jacob asked. We're going to tell them the truth, Bishop Mast replied simply. All of it. About the lump in your field, about the angel we released, about the ancient techniques Raphael taught us. Let them make of it what they will. Sarah looked surprised. Bishop, they'll never believe it. They'll think we're trying to hide some kind of agricultural trade secret, or worse, that we're all suffering from mass delusion. Perhaps, Bishop Mast agreed, but we made a commitment when we released Raphael from his sleeping chamber. We promised to serve as instruments of healing for our community. That community now extends beyond our district, beyond our faith, to include anyone who is struggling to feed their family or care for their land. If God has blessed us with knowledge that can help others, then we have a responsibility to share it, regardless of whether they understand or accept how we came by it. As if summoned by their conversation, Eli Stoltzfus came walking across the field from the direction of the old excavation site. In the months since Raphael's departure, Daniel had taken upon himself the role of guardian of the spot where the angel's sleeping chamber had once rested. The area had become a place of pilgrimage for members of their community, a location where people came to pray, to remember and to reconnect with the miracle that had saved them all. Jacob, Sarah, Bishop, Daniel greeted them slightly out of breath from his walk. I wanted to let you know, the memorial garden is finally complete. They had decided, after much discussion and prayer, to create a permanent reminder of Raphael's visit at the site where his crystal chamber had been buried. Working together as a community, they had planted a circular garden of the most beautiful flowers and healing herbs they could find, arranged in patterns that Raphael had taught them would channel positive energy into the surrounding land. Would you like to see it? Daniel asked. I think you'll be pleased with how it turned out. The four adults, with baby Hope sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms, walked together to the center of Jacob's field. What they found there took their breath away. The memorial garden was indeed beautiful, but more than that, it radiated a sense of peace and sanctity that made everyone who approached it feel closer to the divine. At the center of the garden stood a simple stone marker, carved with words that captured the essence of what their community had experienced. Here slept Raphael, angel of healing, until love called him to wake and serve. Here we learned that miracles are real, that hope never dies, and that God's provision exceeds our ability to imagine or understand. Around the stone, flowers bloomed in colors more vibrant than any they had seen before Raphael's visit. Healing herbs grew in abundance, providing medicine for both humans and animals that seemed to possess unusual potency. And in the very center, where the angel's crystal chamber had once rested, a spring of clear, sweet water had bubbled up from the earth, providing a constant source of life and refreshment. It's perfect, Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face as she remembered that first night when they had heard mysterious music rising from this very spot. There's something else, Daniel said, his voice filled with emotion. Yesterday evening, my son Samuel was playing near the garden when he thought he heard something. He called me over, and I heard it too. What did you hear? Jacob asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Music, Daniel replied. Very faint, very gentle, but definitely music. The same beautiful melody we heard when Raphael was sleeping beneath the earth, waiting for us to find the courage to release him. Bishop Mast knelt beside the spring and cupped his hands to drink from the crystal-clear water. When he stood, his face was radiant with joy. Raphael told us he would always be with us in the knowledge he shared and the love he awakened in our hearts. Perhaps he was being more literal than we understood. As they stood around the memorial garden, sharing memories of the week that had changed everything, other families began to arrive. Word had spread quickly through their district that the garden was complete, and people wanted to see the finished tribute to the angel who had saved their community. The Yoder family approached first, with David carrying his youngest son on his shoulder. The boy had been born just after Raphael's departure, but he had grown up hearing stories of the magnificent angel who had brought healing to their land. Now, as they approached the memorial garden, the child pointed excitedly toward the stone marker. "Angel," he said clearly, his first word about Raphael causing his parents to exchange amazed glances. More families continued to arrive throughout the evening. The Bylers, the Canes, the Millers from Peachy Road, dozens of others whose lives had been transformed by their encounter with divine intervention. As the sun began to set, they found themselves forming a natural circle around the memorial garden, their faces illuminated by the soft light that seemed to emanate from the flowers and herbs that grew there. Without anyone suggesting it, they began to sing, not any particular hymn or song, but the wordless melody that Raphael had taught them, the ancient harmony that called rain from the heavens and abundance from the earth. Their voices blended together in perfect synchronization, creating music that seemed to lift upward toward the stars that were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. As they sang, the most extraordinary thing happened. The spring in the center of the garden began to glow with a soft, pearl-like radiance, and from its depths, they could hear another voice joining their song. It was Raphael's voice, unmistakable in its beauty and power, harmonizing with their human melody to create something that transcended the boundary between earthly and celestial music. Children pressed closer to their parents, their eyes wide with wonder. Adults felt tears streaming down their faces as they experienced once again the overwhelming presence of divine love that had first touched them 6 months earlier. And in the center of it all, baby Hope opened her eyes for the first time since they had arrived at the garden, looking directly toward the glowing spring with an expression of recognition and joy that suggested she could see things that adult eyes might miss. The song continued for nearly an hour, with more and more families joining the circle as word spread throughout the district that something miraculous was happening at Jacob's farm. By the time the last note faded into the star-filled night, over 200 people had gathered to participate in what would later be remembered as the most beautiful and moving worship experience any of them had ever shared. As the glow from the spring gradually faded and people began to make their way home, Jacob found himself standing alone with his wife and daughter in the place where his journey of discovery had begun. The mysterious lump that had puzzled him for 5 years was gone, replaced by a garden of impossible beauty and a spring of living water that would nourish their community for generations to come. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked softly. All the attention from the outside world, all the questions and investigations and skepticism we're going to have to deal with. Jacob looked around at the transformed landscape that surrounded them, at the fields full of abundant crops, at the faces of neighbors who had learned to hope again because one man had been willing to investigate something that didn't make sense. "Never," he said firmly. "Sarah, 6 months ago our community was facing extinction. Families were preparing to scatter. Children were preparing to leave our way of life behind. Generations of faithful living were about to come to an end. Now look at us. Look at what we've become." Sarah followed his gaze across their district, where lights were beginning to appear in windows as families settled in for the evening in homes that were no longer threatened by financial ruin or agricultural failure. "We've become a people who remember that miracles are real," she said. "We've become a community that knows God's love can manifest in ways we never imagined. We've become the kind of place where children grow up expecting divine intervention because they've seen it with their own eyes." Jacob nodded, then looked down at his sleeping daughter. "And she'll grow up in a world where the impossible is just another word for something that hasn't been discovered yet, where faith means trusting in love that transcends understanding, where community in supporting each other through miracles and mysteries alike." As they prepared to return to their house, Jacob cast one more glance toward the memorial garden, where Raphael's spring continued to bubble peacefully in the moonlight. The angel had kept his promise. He was still with them, still blessing their land, still reminding them that divine love was present even when they couldn't see its source. As the autumn wind rustled through Millbrook's maple trees, Sarah Matthews stood at her cottage window, watching the approaching rider. Something about his silhouette against the setting sun made her heart flutter, though she'd sworn never to let another man affect her that way again. Tomorrow would bring investigators and questions and skeptics who would demand scientific explanations for supernatural events. There would be challenges and difficulties and people who would never accept what their community had experienced. But tonight, standing in a field transformed by miracles, holding his wife and daughter close, while the music of angels echoed in his memory, Jacob Miller knew that some gifts are worth any price, and some truths are worth defending regardless of what the world thinks about them. The lump in his cornfield had revealed its secret at last, and that secret had changed everything, not just for one man or one family or even one community, but for everyone who would hear their story and dare to believe that love really is the most powerful force in the universe, and that God's provision really does exceed human ability to imagine or understand. In the distance, a gentle rain began to fall, nourishing the abundant crops and filling the hearts of everyone it touched with the certainty that they were loved, blessed, and cared for by a divine presence that would never abandon them, no matter what challenges the future might bring. The angel had come, had healed their land and their lives, and had left them with the most precious gift of all, the knowledge that miracles are not just possible, but inevitable, for those who have the faith to dig a little deeper than everyone else thinks is why.